Good morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday, March 23rd. I'm Jo Ann Koontz. I'm here with my partner, Marina Parkin, and today we are going to talk to you about individual taxpayer identification numbers, or ITINs. There's a lot of information rolling around that we see on a regular basis that is incorrect, as usual. And in fairness, the rules have changed significantly in the last few years. So as the rules have changed, sometimes that doesn't always catch up. So even people that were familiar with the rules are maybe unfamiliar with the rule changes. So wanted to kind of have a chance to lay the groundwork on where things stand today. This matters to you. If you are a foreign person, if you are a realtor who works with foreign people, if you are a realtor, you possibly work with foreign people. So really all realtors, this would apply to avoid delay if there's FIRPTA or deciding if there's FIRPTA or not. This is going to be part of that conversation. So, Marina, what you got?
Thank you, Jo Ann. Yeah, this is definitely a topic which has still a lot of confusion surrounding it, and rightly so, because the rules have changed, but also it's just a general understanding of who needs it and what does having an ITIN mean. I think because the rights and responsibilities associated with having an ITIN have also shifted a little bit. People are not sure if they need a new one or if they need one or what happens. So what I really wanted to kind of talk about, I wanted to break my talking points today into really who needs an ITIN. And then if you have one or if you had one from before, you do need to renew it. And then also how to go about either getting it or renewing it. So let's start first with who needs an ITIN. So the most important thing here to remember is that ITIN it's a individual taxpayer identification number. It is not a social security number. So you're not entitled to social security benefits if you have an ITIN. So you're not working towards collecting or putting into the social security to later collect from it. It also does not entitle you to an immigration status. It is also does not give you a right to work in US. So these are all extremely important things. Just because you come here and you need to get an ITIN for a couple of different purposes, which I'm about to discuss in a minute, that does not give you sort of the right to be here on the immigration. The tax and the immigration are completely different things. And also the same thing with the right to work. The right to work really ties to your immigration status. And this is where working with the immigration attorney, there's a couple of different visas or a couple of different procedures, I guess, that you're in that will give you the right to work. But you, just by going to IRS and getting an ITIN, does not give you the right to work or the right to any specific visa or the right to claim same benefits as a US tax person. So it's very, very important to remember that. The visa, when we talk about the immigration and we talk about the being here and filing taxes and working and doing things like that, it really depends on what kind of visa you're on here, whether you get an ITIN or you get social security number. So for example, and I'm not going to get into too much detail, I will leave that to the immigration attorneys to explain to our non-resident friends. But for example, in our experience, we see people that are here on the E2 visa, they get a social security number. The actual social security number gives them the right to work, and but they're still on the E2 visa. They still don't have a green card, but they do have a social security number. Funny enough, if they have kids, the kids do not get social security numbers. So we'll talk about kids here in a little bit, but there's other types of visas that you don't even get the social security number as part of it. And then of course, ultimately, when you do get a green card, you do get a social security number, and your kids do as well. So it's important to, if you're confused as far as the immigration versus the US tax, to discuss this not just with the CPA, but also discuss it with the immigration attorney so that they can kind of walk you through what kind of status gives you social security and the right to work and so on versus just an ITIN. Jo Ann, in your experience, do you kind of get that question a lot when you're dealing with people that are moving, buying a business, buying a property, and there's a lot of confusion surrounding what number am I getting?
Yes, and also the confusion happens if they maybe had an ITIN because they were working for a company, an overseas company, and did some work in the US. And so they have an old number that they may or may not still be valid. So that comes up, like, when does this convert to a social security number? The part of the confusion comes from the blocking of the numbers is identical. So just like a social is 3 digits, 2 digits, 4 digits, the ITINs are the same. So you can't tell just looking at it if it's an ITIN or a social based on that sequencing of the digits.
Yep, absolutely correct. So let's talk about then who really needs an ITIN. The most common really reason is that you need to file something in US to do with taxes. Okay, so you come here, you're not resident, you may want to live here, you may not want to live here, you may just have a business, rental property, or you're trying to open a company and you need to file something in US, you need an ITIN. The ITIN gives IRS a way to connect your business activity with your responsibility to report and file the tax return, and also any sort of future filings, whether there's a carryover of the loss from the business activity, or there may have been withholding done for you by your, let's say, employer, or a property manager for your rental, and that gives them a way to hold that money associated with your ITIN so that you can then use it against your tax on the tax return. So basically, anytime there's a filing requirement, if you're not sure whether you have a filing requirement in US, please reach out. A lot of times the non-residents come here, and the very common kind of scenarios, and they have a rental property. Okay, so the rental property, they don't actually need to file a tax return if the property manager collects and remits withholding tax to IRS, because that really absolves them of the responsibility to file, because the IRS is already collecting. The issue is that withholding is really, really high. It's 30% of the gross rental income. So you really don't have the ability to take deduction for expenses. You can do that if you choose to file a tax return. And this is where the need for the ITIN comes in. So you go and get an ITIN, and this way you're filing the tax return and you're telling IRS, look, IRS, sending 30% of my rental revenue to you is too high because I have all these expenses. So let me show you the rental revenue minus all the rental expenses equals to the net rental income or even a rental loss. And now I actually don't have any tax to pay. So by filing a tax return and showing that to the IRS, you are getting out of the requirement to withhold. So oftentimes property managers have to withhold if they know the person is non-resident. Once the person files gets an ITIN and files a paperwork with the property manager saying, hey, I'm gonna handle it, I'm gonna do my own tax return, property manager stops withholding. Now it's up to that non-resident individual with an ITIN to file and report. So a lot of times I get a question that says, hey, it's a loss. I have all these expenses. This is really not going to be a moneymaker. Maybe I'll use it as vacation property one day. Maybe I'll sell it. I don't know yet. It's a loss. The benefit of filing with a loss is that ultimately when that property is sold, you can use the loss against any of the gain from the sale. If you have not filed a tax return with IRS to establish what that loss is, you cannot go back, let's say 5 years from now when you sell the property and say, oh, but look, last 5 years it was a loser, so now I don't have to pay the gain on the sale. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to get the filing in to establish the loss. So then IRS knows, and now you're allowed to use the loss against the gain. We've had several situations, and Jo Ann can attest to that, where we've gone back and filed, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years of tax returns to establish that rental loss carryover year to year to be able to use it against the gain, so that ultimately the tax is either zero or minimized on that gain. So there's the benefit in filing there, but in order to file, you need that ITIN. So that's a very common scenario. Another, of course, common scenario is if you get a job here and you're on the type of visa, again, that doesn't get you the social security number. So getting an ITIN will, and then of course you have the right to work with the immigration. You can then work, and then you may get a W-2 or a 1099, depending depending on if you're a subcontractor for somebody, stuff like that. So you want to file, again, you want to establish some expenses against your income, or you've got that obligation to file the tax return, you're going to get the ITIN. The tax returns that are filed for the non-residents are, it's called a 1040-NR for non-resident, and the filing deadline for those is thankfully a little bit off from our regular crazy deadline. It's June 15th, and then you can extend that for 6 months to December. So you pretty much, a lot of times the non-residents are not here. They may have their rental property records here, they may not make it here. So a lot of my clients do utilize that December extension. So you pretty much have almost a year to file those returns if you're a non-resident, which is great. So the filing requirement, having basically any type of income and your ability to minimize the withholding tax is really the biggest benefit to file, and therefore to go get an ITIN. The other biggest sort of the necessity for ITIN is FIRPTA. Mm-hmm. So FIRPTA is when you are a non-resident seller of real property. And again, just like if you receive rental revenue or when you receive, you know, wages or any other income in US, IRS requires you as the foreign seller to withhold and remit tax on the sale of your real estate. The withholding is very high. It's 15% of the gross selling price. So you are, I mean, it's thousands and thousands of dollars, of course, depending on your selling price, and that becomes a really big number. People don't pay attention to that. They say, oh, 10 or 15%, depending on the circumstance, and then they realize that that number is like 75,000. And then,
it's a big number.
And then all of a sudden,
sure. The percentage is small,
and then
but
all
the
of a sudden, you know, it catches their interest, and then everybody is up in arms, and then we have to explain what FIRPTA is. So what happens there in FIRPTA is you have a couple of different choices. You either do send that money to IRS at the sale, at the time of sale, and then you file the tax return to get the excess withholding back, because you're going to show IRS that your gain on sale may have been a lot less than 15% times the gross selling proceeds, which again, we are back to the filing requirements, so you need an ITIN. The other alternative, which is very common, is the withholding certificate application. And this particular webinar is not about that. We will have a separate one, but just to mention that this is kind of like doing a preemptive tax return in a way. Is you're filing for it's a withholding certificate application, which basically tells IRS, look, if I sell this property, then I want to show you that my gain is very small, or I may even have a loss. So withholding 15% is going to be too high. So can you please allow me to not withhold it? And you submit that to IRS the day of closing, no later than the day of closing, or earlier if you can. So it can get to be a pretty big package, and here the time is very sensitive because again, you're tied to the closing date. Oftentimes not everything that is needed for that withholding certificate application is available way before the closing, so you kind of have a week or 2 weeks typically before the closing where all of this, all the puzzle pieces come together, and you need an ITIN number with the application. So if you send in the application for withholding certificate without an ITIN application, IRS is not going to process it, they're going to deny it. So then you're also in a big rush to get an ITIN application done at that time. Usually those things get stressful, and it's not just in your particular case, or if you're a realtor, it's not just in your seller's case. It is pretty much 95% of the time, if you've got a seller that does not already have an ITIN, and now you need to hurry and get an ITIN, get the withholding certificate application done, get all of that timely to IRS, certified, stamped the day before closing. So that is another big reason why you need ITIN. And then of course you may have some other filings to do. Oftentimes we get a question on, hey, I'm here over 180 days, but I am not really I'm retired, so I don't really generate any income in US, but I am here over 183 days. Do I need to file anything? And in some circumstance, there's kind of a treaty form to say, yeah, I'm here, so I want to disclose that I'm here over 180 days, but I choose to take the treaty stand that I am a tax resident in another country. I know with Canadians, oftentimes it's kind of like a blanket standard form, and you don't even need to get an ITIN to file that form. But depending on what else is going on and how many days you're here and how many days consistently you're here over the year, you may have to file a tax return in order to claim that treaty election, that you don't have to pay tax in US, which again, for that, you need an ITIN so that IRS can process you and say, okay, yes, I know you're here over these number of days, but I will allow you to take the treaty exemption to say that you are not a tax resident of US, you're a tax resident of another country. So all of these types of filing need an ITIN. Jo Ann, any other situations that you kind of came across where you've seen people either have it or have it in the past, or?
So, like I said, I see people who have it because they have worked in the US for a foreign company. The other problem that I see come up a lot is that people are applying too early before there is an actual return to file. Or they come in and they say, okay, I'm ready to file. I know I'm going to need one. I just bought my property, I'm going to rent it. And I know I'm going to need one next year when I do my tax return for my rental income. And you can't go early, and there's no real exception around that. So
and I will definitely talk about that when we discuss, how to apply and when. But that is one of the biggest things that has changed over the years, because in the past you used to be able to apply whenever you think you needed it, but that definitely has changed. So so I will touch on that. What I wanted to also discuss is the spouse and the kids. Does your spouse and the kids need an ITIN? So let's say you are a tax resident, and you marry someone who is a non-US resident. Do they need an ITIN? Well, yes, maybe yes, maybe no. So most of the time, if you marry somebody and you go through the process of getting them a green card, ultimately that person will get a social security number. They may not have one right now, and it's a long process, right, Jo Ann? It may take several years, depending on how quickly things move. But in the meantime, you can get an ITIN for your spouse, because you as the taxpayer who is a US resident can file jointly with your spouse who is a non-US resident and claim the benefit of a joint filing, which means that you've got a joint tax bracket on which to pay tax for your income, and you're going to ultimately end up in a lower rate. But that really depends on what your spouse is up to. Do they have any income in overseas? Do they have any other reporting requirements? Once you put your spouse as a joint filer on your tax return, that automatically forces them to have to report their worldwide income in US. So now they're filing, doesn't matter really how many days they were here in that particular year, they're now treated as a US tax person. So you can get them in the ITIN and then they file, but if they do have an income stream from overseas, you're going to show that on the jointly filed tax return, as well as if there's any foreign bank accounts or foreign financial assets, you've got to disclose that in the FBAR filing. So these are all the things that you kind of have to think about when you're determining whether you're going to file with your spouse before that spouse really becomes US green card holder or social security holder. So that's definitely a very common thing I see with the spouse. And then the kids. Let's talk about the kids, because that also has changed. Specifically in situations, like I said, where you've got a type of visa where you and your spouse may get the social security number, but the kids do not, like an E2 visa, for example. So you guys are here, you own a business, husband and wife get the social security, the kids do not get a number. You can get them the ITINs. What does the ITIN give you? So unfortunately, starting within 2018, when the new Trump law passed, you cannot take a child tax credit for a dependent who's got an ITIN. So when the child credit kind of doubled and went from 1,000 to 2,000 a kid, and then you have some additional child credit depending on the income level, you cannot, you used to be able to take that with the ITIN dependents, but in 2018 to 25, the time frame of the new law, you cannot. So that's the biggest change. However, you can take other dependent credit for the kids with ITIN, which is $500 per dependent. So it's, why leave that on the table? It's definitely worthwhile getting an ITIN for the kids to be able to claim that. So the other credit that you are not allowed to take with kids with ITIN is earned income credit. So if both spouses work or it's just one of you, and usually if you're below a certain income threshold and you've got dependents, you're able to get eligible earned income credit, and you cannot if your kids have an ITIN. So no child credit, no earned income credit, but yes, of other dependent credit of $500. So there's still benefit to do that. There's other situations where I've noticed that having kids with ITIN helps. For example, the most recent one that actually I did a little bit of research on just this week, there's a premium tax credit for those that take marketplace health insurance. And when you reconcile whether you took too much or not enough of that premium tax credit against your on your tax return, it requires you to enter family size to say how much credit you're entitled to and how much of it you have to pay back. So if you have dependents that do not have any numbers, no socials and no ITINs, they're not considered part of the family size for that income threshold, which is crazy. But if the kids have an ITIN number, then you can count them in the family size, which means you're entitled to a bigger premium tax credit for that marketplace health insurance. So there's a couple of different minute things like that, and sometimes you don't know that until you stumble across it in practicing. So we kind of bring you guys, you know, this is from the battlefield, if you will. So dependent is definitely worth getting the ITINs for them. As you know, in 2018 when the exemptions went away, then you know, for everybody, U.S. people and non-residents, it sort of negated, you know, the need for these ITINs. But you can, like I said, you can still get that other dependent credit if you've got a dependent with an ITIN. So I definitely think it's worth it going to do that. So we covered the individual, we covered the spouse, and we covered the dependent as far as really who needs an ITIN. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the expiration and do I need to renew before we move on. Jo Ann, any questions? I saw a couple of things in the chat. I wasn't sure if it was something that the one was specific.
Yeah, the one chat question was about the kids. So
okay,
you were
perfect.
Kind of headed in that direction anyways.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, sounds good. So let's talk a little bit about the expiration and renewal. So the way the rules stand right now is, there's two reasons, I guess, to renew. So if you haven't used your ITIN that you already had at any one of the years in the last 3 years, so in 17 or 18 or 19, and I guess now it would be 18, 19, and 20. So if you haven't used your ITIN in at least one of the last 3 years, it's considered expired, and then you have to renew. Also, if you got an ITIN before 2013, it expires based on the 2 middle digits that are signed. And there's a sort of a schedule to say these ITINs with these digits expire in this year, and on and on. And that is available through IRS's website. So you can even go in there and look and say, hey, I had an old ITIN, but my digits are this and this, does it expire or not? If you are not sure, the consensus is file the tax return with the ITIN number that you have. What it's going to do is, if IRS receives it and your ITIN is in fact expired, they will send you a notice to say, hey, your ITIN has expired, you have to renew, but that will get your tax return filed timely. which is key. So they're not going to hold it against you that you filed with the expired ITIN for the purposes of timeliness. So if you've got your rental tax return that's due, June 15th, and you extend and now it's December, and you think you had an old ITIN that you've dug up from being here, 10 years ago, please let's use that and file a tax return. IRS will tell you then if it's expired, and then you need to renew. So that has been kind of the big thing. We did that research a little bit for a client actually a few months ago, and we did end up filing, and everything got processed. So I think it's fine. I am not sure, to be honest with you right now, if if it's something that's automated, or if somebody's really looking at it, or if they're just really processing the returns anyway, or they're just behind and not processing any non-resident returns. But most certainly I would file if you think you have an ITIN file. Now, the other thing is, it is not your foreign identification number, which is also the conversation we often have to have. Okay, well, if I don't have social, but I have my, Canadian social security number or my other foreign, that is not an ITIN. An ITIN is a number that IRS assigns to you to handle any of the federal U.S. tax filings. So definitely, as far as the expiration goes, it is a little wonky, but please file if you have one, if you do have a filing requirement. Any questions here, Jo Ann? I haven't really seen anybody. Now, I know my non-resident people, they file every year, my ongoing clients. So I haven't had anybody with expiration issue.
All of my expiration people are new, like new FIRPTA people that we haven't had activity with in the past. They haven't been existing clients. They've been people that have come in because of FIRPTA, because they're selling, or like I said, because they used to work here and now maybe they're going to buy a business and move back here. They've already had some exposure to living in the States, and now they want to do it themselves. And they say, oh, I have an ITIN. Well, maybe not.
Yeah.
We do have one question that says, is it possible to build credit with an ITIN, and how would you know if the ITIN is expired? You mentioned the numbers. But in terms of building credit with an ITIN, that's not typically, the banks, you can open a bank account with it, but because with an ITIN, you're not typically looking at a work history, they're not using that for credit. So we typically see, if we have foreign nationals who are looking to move to the US, and they want to buy a house and say take a mortgage, what they'll do is get the mortgage as a second home, like a foreigner, like a foreign mortgage, get the money maybe on a house at home, or buy as a foreign national here, which is typically a 30% down program. You're borrowing from a US bank in US dollars, so there's no conversion issues or anything like that. And they're really looked at as like vacation homes. Those are 30% down. What you need to be mindful of is, if you're looking to do that, to move and buy a house, you need to do it while you're still a foreign person, because once you're here, getting that E2 visa, that program goes away for you, that loan program. So to the point of, can you build credit with an ITIN? Typically that answer is no. You're not going to be able to build credit until you're here. And if you're here with an E2 or a green card, you're typically looking at a social. So we don't see those as credit building numbers.
Well, staying on that subject, Jo Ann, is I guess, so they can borrow, they can get a loan with an ITIN, or for nationals, because they don't even, do they even need an ITIN to borrow money?
No, so depending on what country you're coming from, the source document, like a W-2, for example, it's a P60 in England or whatever. Every country has a different source document. Whatever your income proof is, you would provide that to show your income. And like I said, they're typically looked at as vacation properties. So the interest rate won't be as low as what you or I could pay as American citizens, but that is at least a loan program that's available. What sometimes happens if folks don't have counsel is they come here, they are pursuing their E2, and now they say, okay, I've rented for a year and now I want to buy a house. Well, you don't really have enough credit to get a mortgage yet. So if you feel strongly about having the house, particularly as hot as the market is, some people want to get in now before it goes up more. You really need to do that first, then get your E2, and then once you are having a adequate credit history, you can refinance that and get a lower interest rate.
Are there specific banks, Jo Ann, that work? You can't just go into any bank and say, hey,
Yeah,
I'm
there's
foreign
some that
national.
have more appetite for this, and that changes on a regular basis. We can certainly connect anybody who has a particular need. We do have an HSBC bank branch in Miami, which is also common particularly in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
So really any bank that you would see have a foreign presence as well,
Mm-hmm.
is something that is usually going to work. But there's a lot of American based lenders that will lend to foreign nationals. They have a tendency to be in loan brokerage type programs. So it's not going to be Bank of America or Chase. It's going to be, Loan Depot or things you've never heard of. It's not actually Loan Depot, but like that, like a mortgage broker, servicer kind of company. So
well, I remember last year when it was the PPP time or just SBA loan, there was a lot of confusion too as to who can get an SBA loan. It was the same idea. Can these non-residents, owners of the business get a SBA loan? And I do remember doing some research, and it looked like if you had other owners who were either present in US for a full time, full year, the business could get a loan, but it was still very gray. And again,
keep in mind that the banks are not conversant in the IRS rules, and the IRS rules are different than the immigration rules. So what a resident means, is it for tax purposes? Is it for immigration purposes? Are we just talking about the days met test? What if you have a green card holder who's filing a treaty and saying, I'm going to have closer connection to home? So there's a bunch of different ways that can go sideways. So you really, at the end of the day, need to be very mindful of who's asking the question to determine which set of rules you fall under when you start talking about banking and lending and things like that. They're not automatically using the IRS definitions, and you've got to be careful even if you're using IRS definitions, different parts of the Internal Revenue Code define people and families and related parties and things like that differently. So you can't just say, oh, this means that, because, well, it depends which dictionary we're in, which definition rule book we're in. So just be mindful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit then about when to apply for an ITIN and how to apply for an ITIN, because this conversation can very easily lead into, well, what's the filing requirement for non-resident? And we can kind of cover that at a separate time as to who has to file what kind of return, treaty exemption, and stuff like that. So kind of focusing back on the procedural things when it comes to getting an ITIN. So as Jo Ann mentioned a little bit earlier, you used to be able just to say, hey, I am, buying a rental property. I think I'm going to need a tax return. Let me go get an ITIN. You fill out this ITIN application. You attach a copy of your passport. You send it off to IRS. Within a few months, you have your number. By the time you have to file a tax return, you're ready to go. Well, that has really changed and I don't even want to say over the last few years. I feel like in the last 10 years, it's kind of been a big change. So now, in order for you to file for an ITIN, you need to have a reason. And so then your deadline for filing becomes really the reason why you're filing. So for example, if you've got the FIRPTA that you're working on, and as I said, you want to do the withholding certificate application to your request to reduce the withholding, your deadline there is you have to submit that no later than the closing date of the sale of your property. So that becomes your deadline. So you've got to do the ITIN application together with the withholding certificate, and all of that goes together. Because now you are saying, what is my reason for applying? Aha, I am doing the FIRPTA paperwork. You have your application, you attach the FIRPTA paperwork, and you apply. If you need to file a tax return because you've got a rental property or another business that you are reporting, then the deadline to apply for ITIN becomes the deadline of your tax return filing, which, as I said, is June 15th original, or you can extend till December 15th. When it comes to that filing deadline for the non-residents, I do have to say there's a lot of flexibility in that. This is our deadline, but if there's no tax owing with your non-resident return, even if you're late because you were overseas, you were not aware of the filing requirement, you didn't know what to do, you had no access to your records until you came to the country, which is not often the time that you want to come. if you file even late and file late for the ITIN application, you're not really going to get denied, or you're not going to get, you know, penalized for late filing. If ultimately there's tax due, you're going to get some late filing and late payment penalty for tax owing, but your application is still going to get processed. But please keep in mind those deadlines. So when you're filing the tax return, and that's the reason why you need an ITIN, your ITIN application then has to go with the tax return. And on the ITIN application, you're saying, I'm applying for ITIN because I'm filing the tax return, and here you go, here's my tax return. There's other reasons too. There's, you know, let's say you're an athlete, or you are here, you're a professor and you're teaching, or you're a student and you're applying for that, or applying to seek any other treaty benefits. Whatever form you're filing is got to be attached to the application, because that becomes your reason for filing, and the deadline associated with that form becomes the deadline for the ITIN application. So that is the key thing to remember, is you cannot preemptively file just because you think you're going to need it. If the actual need for it has to be your support for the application. There is one, I don't want to say exemption, but kind of a little bit of a way around it for those with a rental. Oftentimes, instead of waiting for the tax return that already has a certain amount or a year of your rental activity before you file for the tax return and ITIN, if you are working with a property management company, you can go and apply to say that you want to remove that 30% withholding on the rental income, and that's why you're filing, so that you don't have to wait for the full year of that 30% withholding to get your ITIN and file your tax return. So what you would need for that is I know in the past we've done just an agreement with a property management company, and oftentimes a letter from the property management company that says, hey, we've got a renter, we are a landlord that we're going to be working with, we need that landlord to have an ITIN in order for us to work with them or get the rental stuff going. So with the request letter and the property management agreement, we can prepare the application, and there's a box we can check as that being the reason, and we can send you on your way to apply for ITIN with that. So that is definitely the big thing. So anybody with the rental property during the year when you're getting everything set up, maybe the year to apply. So now that's kind of when to apply. Now, how to apply is, it's a whole different beast now. It's a bit of a hot mess because, again, in the past, you used to be able to apply by attaching a copy of your passport. That has changed to say, okay, you either have to apply in person with the IRS agent, because they are going to look at your passport and the application and you in person to kind of verify your identity, if that's the way to say it properly, so that they know it's the real person who's applying, and you're not just going to have some phantom somebody getting an ITIN number in US. So either you apply in person with an IRS agent. I believe those services were suspended when IRS closed, and I am actually not sure that they have reopened that in the local branches. We've got a local branch in Sarasota, but I have not, well, none of my non-residents who need an ITIN are actually physically here because of the travel ban, but I have not heard that that branch has reopened for ITIN application. Jo Ann, anything?
No.
No. Yeah, so the alternative to going in person is applying through something called a certified acceptance agent. Now, who is that? That's not just a CPA. That is a CPA or CPA firm who has gone through kind of a process with IRS to say, I want to be sort of an agent for you to be able to do the second best. Instead of sending the person to the IRS agent directly, I will kind of do that work on your behalf. There is a course to get through, and there's a little bit of a licensing and check and all that, and it takes a little time to do it. Once the firm gets, or specific individual, a professional gets a certification to be a certified acceptance agent, they can have an appointment with you to do the same thing that the IRS office does. They meet with you in person, they look at your original passport, they fill out the paperwork to say that they have verified that your passport copy supports your actual identity, and then that letter goes together with the application to IRS. Last year, they have allowed Zoom to be the way for the certified acceptance agent to meet with an individual, which has been fantastic. However, the certified acceptance agent still needs a original passport. So we work with someone who's a certified acceptance agent, and what basically we would do is have the individual mail a passport to certified acceptance agent. Then they set up a Zoom meeting, and then we can mail the passport back. So that kind of has been a great way of doing it. Because alternatively, if you're not here and you do not connect with a certified acceptance agent, you have to mail in the passport. So nobody wants to mail the passport to an IRS with the application. That is probably the worst possible idea or alternative to applying for an ITIN. You always want to have, but sending the passport to a certified acceptance agent is definitely a better alternative, because at least it's in the private company, and then we can DHL it back to you wherever you are. So that works. The other thing that mindful staying on the certified acceptance agent track is that if you're overseas and there's a larger firm, like a national firm like Deloitte or Ernst & Young, they have certified acceptance agents there. So depending on where you live, you may be able to call around and see if, let's say there's a Deloitte there, if they have a certified acceptance agent that you can go and see there in person, instead of using somebody in US where you have to send the passport. So we've had a couple of people that were successful getting their passport certified that way, and then that certified copy goes with the application. Finally, the other alternative is to go to a passport issuing authority. So I guess this would be the original government entity who would have issued your passport. You can go there, and so let's say in Canada, that's a very common thing that we do with our Canadians, is they just go to a passport office in Canada. They then get a copy of their passport, and the passport office has a little verbiage that they stamp and say, this is a true copy of the passport that we have issued to this individual. So it's kind of a certification by the original issuing authority that this is a legit passport. That can also be attached to the application, and then you can send it in. So as you can see, it's kind of a little bit of a procedure. So if you think you need to file a tax return, if you think there's FIRPTA cooking in your world, or you think or you're not sure, please reach out as soon as you can, so we can at least go over these options. We had, as a good example, we had a sale we were helping with FIRPTA, Jo, and we were doing the closing on the law firm side, and the closing was, I believe, sometime in February. The lady reached out in November, December. She lives in Toronto, and we talked about that whole passport office thing. She went right away, and thankfully they were open, because they're also not open every day or certain hours. So she scheduled the appointment. She went right away. She got that certified copy of the passport. This way she had the time to send it to me also. And then when I was putting her FIRPTA documents a month or two later, I already had everything I need. So it wasn't holding me up that we still needed to get that for the ITIN application. So it definitely is something. And I think that, Jo Ann, also tell me if, I believe some people had luck in going to an embassy in UK. I remember something like that, but I don't think that is really an option.
The embassy will not certify the passport. It's got to be the CAA that's there. Like you said, it's typically going to be a Deloitte or something like that, where if they can get to one of those types of offices. But the embassy can do the notarization of the closing documents, but they can't. They don't have any authority.
They cannot do that certified. And keep in mind.
In fact, that certification that you were talking about, Canada is the only place I'm familiar with that will do that. The UK will not certify that through the passport office. That, in my experience, I'm not. I don't live there, but I haven't had that come through in any other country other than Canada.
I was also trying to think, because we had quite a few people from Czech Republic, and I feel like they were going in Prague to the passport office, but this is now a little while ago, and I don't remember if they were successful or if they ended up going to a certified acceptance agent who was part of a firm.
What I experienced with folks, particularly in Eastern Europe, was sometimes the closest CAA was not in your home country, and that's okay as well. So you could go to a CAA that's sitting in the neighboring country if that's physically closer to you because you live close to the border, and maybe the larger city or the capital city of your country is further away. You don't have to do that in your own country. You can do that anywhere. Any CAA can do that. So just be mindful of that sometimes it's like the airplane. The closest exit may not be the one in front of you.
That's right. Exactly. And that is probably, in all of my experience, the biggest part of the whole procedure is getting that ITIN. So the earlier we can start the process, like I said, we have a couple of CAs here. We work with one who is amazing. And now that you can do Zoom, it's pretty easy, but you still need time to mail your passport in for us to get it, set up the appointment with the certified acceptance agent, have them do the paperwork, and then so everything takes a little time. You cannot wait till last minute to have this done. Sometimes that can be a difference between being able to apply for the withholding certificate or sending the money to IRS at closing and then waiting to apply with a tax return, when it's time for filing. If you cannot get the ITIN together, you cannot file a withholding certificate application on time. So that really becomes quite a procedure. And then now in sort of all big picture consideration now, IRS is so slow at processing FIRPTA that you may as well wait till the end of the year to file your tax return, send the money in, because you may not see that money any earlier than next year anyway from the withholding certificate. In my experience, and I'm now bombarded with the emails of the FIRPs that we did last year to say, oh my God, where's my money? You told me 90 days. And yes, that's what the instructions say, but that's not real life anymore. So we're at a 9. Exactly. I think it looks like, from what I see now being processed, it's 9 to 10 months.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. In fact, I was talking to one of the colleagues and she said, the way they're so slow now, I wouldn't have been bothered.
Well, and I just had a conversation with somebody about that a week ago, and I was very upfront about what that looks like. The problem with taking that approach is as they continue to reopen and restaff, if that starts to move more quickly and you were in, maybe they do get done in 6 months and now you're voluntarily waiting until the return. So I'm not deciding. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying these are your choices. So the person that I spoke with actually still decided to proceed with the withholding certificate. Just, they are opening more offices. And part of the issue with the IRS closing was not just that people physically had their offices closed, but the IRS had always required their staff to share resources. So they worked a lot of shift work, which meant on certain days or at certain times, I came and I worked at this workstation computer. And on the times when I was off, Marina came and worked at this workstation computer. Their new policy began to say that they couldn't share computers because of the physical touching. So I had spoken with a gentleman in the entity department on a different issue. And he said, well, I'm back, but my co-partner is not able to come back for 8 weeks until they get her a computer. So a lot of that stuff is starting to work its way through, and you are still seeing the backlog from before, but I would anticipate that will start to loosen up as time goes on, because those resources are coming online and the people are returning to their offices. So I don't expect that it will continue to take 10 months to process FIRPTA, but I also can't be untruthful with somebody and say, hey, this is going to.
Yeah. And I have to say that when you apply for FIRPTA and you apply for ITIN, withholding certificate application and ITIN application, that takes longer anyway. Because the way that process works is it first gets routed to the ITIN department. Once the ITIN is issued, then it goes into the withholding certificate department for them to approve or deny it. So that process anyway will be a little bit longer. If you already have an ITIN, I agree with Jo Ann, apply for withholding certificate now because things are moving a little bit faster. We got a couple of FIRPTAs in the right now cooking. So
the kitchen is smelly with all that cooking.
The kitchen smells. And of course, it's all in the middle of tax season, which is okay. Of course, but
rules, shall we?
out of the 4 that I've got on my plate right now, 3 already have ITIN. So they filed rental returns or had an ITIN from past years. So we are clear to work on those withholding certificate. But the one that we need to work on the ITIN issue, we need to figure out the timing. It's tough. It's tough. So just be mindful of all of those things, and we're definitely here for some resources. We also work with several folks who specialize in nothing but cross-border taxation and the need to file. So if you're ever confused about, do I need to even file in US and what's my requirement? And it's something that we may not have the expertise on, depending on what country you're from or what type of business you have or what's happening in your life, we will connect you with a cross-border specialist, and they can help you out by doing a little bit more detailed research on the filing requirements. So if it's not us, we'll make sure to connect you to somebody who can help you. So we're all sorts of plugged in. Any other questions, Jo Ann, on that? This subject is one of those things that
this is Pandora's box.
It is.
Once you get going, you're gone.
Yes.
No, we have exhausted the questions, and I think
good.
A lot of them came up, but we were already answering them. So I won't
wonderful.
Over the point.
Good.
So I think we're all caught up there.
Awesome.
All I can say too is that the earlier anybody knows this stuff, the better. So the sooner you can say something, if you might need a number, we can get going on those withholding certificate applications the moment you have a buyer. So if we can discuss this stuff before that becomes the case, it's much easier to get your application in faster, so that part of your time that you're waiting in those months is time that you're also waiting for the closing to happen. So if you're under contract for, say, 45 days to close, if you've done all this work ahead of time, the second we get your contract, we can prepare your withholding certificate. That withholding certificate could go in, say, 35 days before closing. And then of the 6 months you might wait, 35 are taken up by time you were waiting on the closing anyways. So it will really help speed that process up.
For sure.
So those are just things, the sooner that you can say something, the better planning can be done. So
awesome.
So there you go. That is a wrap for today. As always, you will find that we share these recordings with you on our YouTube channel, on our Koontz Associates and Koontz Parkin websites and Facebook pages. Do tune in with us next week. We'll have John Cipher on to talk about why management is hard and how to make it easier.
I'll be there listening to that.
I'll be logged in myself. So it's always fun to have him and his cool one-man band pictures. So we welcome your input on topics with which you'd like to hear more about. So you're welcome to email us and drop ideas on us if there's content you'd like to hear. So without further ado, thanks for joining us, and we will see you next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Bye.